Hi, folks. Welcome to the channel. One of the things that I've always enjoyed doing through life, and it's not even just enjoying, it's actually how I've managed to survive a lot of the adversities and the things that I've, encountered in life. How I overcame, or dealt with the disability of having contracted polio and poverty and growing up dirt poor and all that other stuff. And there's been a lot of advantages and such, but basically it's been my perspective. I always try to put myself in various perspectives that'll give me the best outcome for a beneficial perception. All right. And so that's why I decided to go ahead and do this video, because everybody's up in arms and talking about the chaos and the confusion and the division in this country and all this other stuff and in the world and all that. And those are all valid. It's all true. But I just thought maybe I'd try to, hit a couple of points and just give you maybe a different perspective. We'll start with climate, okay? Climate change. Well, there's no doubt that climate change is happening. Things are getting warmer. This area where Lori and I live is averaging, 5, 6, 10 degrees hotter, in the summers, and a little cooler maybe in the winters. But essentially, let's look at that. This world has always, had some sort of climate change. There were times we were boiling, and I'm talking billions of years ago. There was the ice age. Then the ice age had to thaw. That had to be due to excessive heat. And so it's always been that way. Now, it doesn't mean not to be concerned today, because it doesn't matter what happened yesterday or what's going to happen in the future. It's happening now. But at any rate, climate change. World's always been in a climatic turmoil. War and violence. Okay, well, we've had a lot of wars in the past, and society has always had a certain amount of violence. I mean, go way, way, way back to the Inquisitions, go way back to World War I, even back further than that, and revolutions and upheaval and all this other stuff. It's happened before, and so nothing really, in many, many ways, has changed per se. Now, let's take a look at humanity and people. Okay, so right now, we're all wrapped around the axle, over the economy and the cost of living. There's no doubt about it. Doggone, it's costing us more to live. What I could live on 28 years ago on $640 a month, now requires probably, $1,000 to $1,100 a month. And stop and think back, when there were kings and there were peasants, and they would, bust their tails off. A lot of them died early because basically of being overworked, and then they gave most of it, to the kings for their protection, in case another kingdom came and decided to kill them all or create a war, which really wasn't up to any of the peasants of these kingdoms, but it was up to the kings that decided to fight each other. So that's always been going on. Now think of slavery. Think of bonded and indentured servitude when it was actually legal. I mean, you could literally, be an indentured servant for X amount of years and not get paid. And so, the gap between the rich and the poor, well, that's always existed. If you stop and you think about it. Just the rich and the poor. Yeah. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist now, and that maybe there's not, maybe we could develop a little equanimity, but it's always existed. There's a lot about sexuality and gender, and people are up in arms over homosexuality and gender identification and all that. And then stop and look back, between the 300 BC and 500 AD in the Greek and Roman culture period. where bisexuality was a significant part of the culture. Nobody batted an eye on it at it. Even homosexuality, that was a little bit different. That was more accepted between slave and owner and that kind of thing. It wasn't as generally practiced. Overall, but bisexuality was. So, I mean, so where has that changed? Have we gotten more, sexually corrupt? Have we gotten more perverse? No, I don't think so. How about Marat Sade, the great English earl or duke or whatever he was that introduced sadism into sexual practice? So let's see. Government world leaders confused self-serving and chaotic. Well, so what's new? I mean, I think that's always existed. If you look back in history, you're going to find there have been a lot of governments and a lot of world leaders that were confused, self serving, and a lot of world leaders that were psychopathic. Idi Amin, Stalin, massacring millions of his own people. So, take a look. Always keep these things in mind. Incompetence. Things seem to be getting incompetent. Incompetently run, incompetently, product manufacturing of products and that kind of thing. Well, think back before there was technology and before machinery and the advancement of the industrial age. We were probably somewhat incompetent back then. Okay, and so maybe what we're experiencing now is just a little bit of a revision, kind of a new level of incompetency. Some things aren't made as well as they used to be, and that brings me back to a thought of I remember when the first transistor was came into being, and people said, "Hey, a transistor radio, you'll never have to buy tubes; it'll last forever." But then what happened is that a lot of those discrete components, transistors, diodes, capacitors and all that other stuff started being kind of made overseas, for the inexpense of it, and then they started failing, and so there's that kind of scenario to keep in mind. So what has changed that's pretty significant is we're living in the information age, and that was a good term for it, or a good term for it. Because yes, we're getting information rapidly, very fast, but now the issue is and it's also concerns AI, artificial intelligence. It's manipulative and it's deceptive, and but if you stop and you think, we've always had manipulative people and we've always had deception in societies. Think of the carpetbaggers and the snake oil salesman. This is going to cure you of everything. Oh, okay, people have always been out to grab, the change that we leave on the dresser, at night. There are people that stay up in Madison Avenue as we speak that are trying to come up with how they can get that change that you've left on the top of your dresser. So now we have to determine with AI, for example, what's real. Is it real? No. Luckily, the voice stuff is pretty easy to determine. Oh, it's AI. And the visual stuff sometimes too, if you really look. But it's going to get better and better and better. And then AI is going to get really proficient, is what I predict. And it's going to be really, really difficult to determine what's real and what's not. But on the same token, the ancient adepts, thousands of years ago, Buddha, Taoism, Lao Tzu, they were all discussing, hey, what is reality, and wanting you to examine that. It was done in more of a spiritual, philosophical fashion, but in reality, I don't see much difference between that. And so what do we do? Okay, I don't like to just sit there and throw out things and gripe and that kind of thing. And this isn't a gripe, it's an observation. And well, one thing that you can do is try practicing not reacting, but responding. Okay. I once came across some great graffiti on an old Beatnik Cafe's bathroom wall, and it was responsibility the ability to respond. Okay, and so try to practice your ability to respond by looking at all these different areas and perspectives. Um, you got to determine what truly matters to you and what doesn't. Okay. Once you get that nailed down, then maybe if you want to venture off and become an activist and see what foster your opinion on humanity and the world of what matters, to the world and to them, you can. But I think we got to start with what truly matters to us, and what doesn't. And don't engage in that which doesn't. One of the beauties of getting older, I was thinking about it the other day. I just recently turned 75. One of the things that's really kind of neat is how you kind of reach an age of not caring about the stuff that doesn't really matter. You don't care anymore about your appearance as far as being gorgeous and or being sexy or any of that other stuff. It just sort of drops away. It doesn't really matter. Your nose gets bigger, but as long as I can continue to breathe out of it, I'm delighted. And one of the things that I did basically early on is because I grew up dirt poor. I mean, really, really dirt poor. And some of my other videos get into a little bit of that detail. And then I became sort of somewhat affluent. Um, and had things. I had conventional housings or businesses. I drove around in some fancy German cars and all that stuff. Mostly it was to experience that experience, because I used to be poor and on the street, and I'd see somebody go by in a Porsche or a Mercedes or a fancy car, and I literally, because I had an impoverished mentality at the time, I was so used to being poor, you almost feel, well, you deserve it. And that's a hard thing to overcome, but you can. I did. And you say, oh, well, that's never a possibility for me. That's only for those people. And then bit by bit, I worked my way up and I realized that, heck, no, that's not necessarily true. And there I was driving a Mercedes, driving a Porsche and all that stuff. It was kind of fun. To some degree. But deep down inside, I knew it really wasn't me. I knew I didn't really want to do it. And part of that is because of sustainability. One of the things, and I did in my recent video on our $16,000, off-grid home, which to a lot of people is just kind of a hovel. I got one comment that was pretty amusing. It looked like a hobo shack, which I think actually was rather appropriate. It is a hobo shack. I'm a comfortable hobo, and I like living in a shack. And one of the reasons is I've always been suspicious of obtaining some really, really nice things, or cautious, and fancy stuff and that kind of deal, because what happens if you lose it? And look at the people that have lost some wonderful homes due to weather, landslides, tornadoes, hurricanes, and floods. It's devastating. And so in a way, I have, not because I'm paranoid, but I've kind of gone through life. I determined early on what I need to be comfortable, and I've kept that very, very simple. And then I haven't tried to embellish on that. And so that if something were to happen, to my little, Flintstone house here or whatever, it could be replaced, or something similar could replace it, and I'd be in a position where I could afford to do that. Because one thing that I do love is that Lori and I both love, and that's stability. And it reminds me, and I'll close with this. Years and years ago, when I was a bum artist living in a chicken coop, I was reading a book by James Lord, who spent several weeks with Alberto Giacometti, the great Italian sculptor and painter, way back in the in the early 20s and late 1800s. And Giacometti lived in a small little hovel of a 10 by 10 studio in kind of a ramshackle ghetto artist area of France, where he'd lived all of his life. But now he was a multimillionaire. Now he was a world famous and internationally known successful artist. He was one of the pride artists of France. And so what did he do? Well, he rented the he rented the 10-foot studio next door to him, and that was about it. And then he rented 10-foot 10-foot square studio, or 10 by 10 square foot studio, 100 square feet. Um, Next door to him, where his brother Diego set up a little furnace and forge, studio, so he could do all of Giacometti's bronzes. And the bathroom was down the hall. I mean, seriously. And so James Lord one time asked, I said, Alberto, Jesus, other than the fact that we went out and had a rather nice meal, a while back, and a fairly nice bottle of wine, I look at you and you're wearing the same corduroy suits or suit that you've worn kind of all your life, and you're living in the same hovel that you've always lived in. You could be like Picasso and live in a castle and all this other stuff. And I'm just curious as to what's up with that. And Giacometti replied, I always try to maintain living the type of lifestyle that if I were to become destitute tomorrow, because the art world's a very fickle place, all of a sudden my stuff could not sell, it could become useless. And so if I were to become destitute tomorrow, it would change very little for me. Give that some thought. I love that, and I live by that. Bye-bye.